that sound. If you have ever felt displaced in a home that was supposed to be yours, you already know what that sound means. It does not need to be loud to be devastating. It just needs to be deliberate. My name is Kaya. And the day my Korean mother-in-law walked into her own kitchen, looked at me standing at her stove, and said, without raising her voice, without changing her expression, "I will finish this," I felt something inside me go very quiet in a way I did not fully understand for 2 years. This is not a cooking story. It is not a culture clash story. It is a story about what belonging actually requires, and why it is rarely what you think it is. And it ends in the most unexpected place. But we have to start where it started. Yellow heart, if you have ever walked into a room and felt invisible in a home that was supposed to be yours, this one is for you. Hit like before we even start. You will understand why before the 10-minute mark. And if you are new here, subscribe. Because this family does not do surface level. Part 1. The kitchen is a language I did not speak. I met Jay on a Tuesday in Lagos. He was standing outside a restaurant that had no signage and served the best pepper soup you would find in that part of the city, staring at his phone with the face of a man who had just been completely betrayed by technology. Tall. Slightly lost. Wearing a jacket that was completely wrong for March in Lagos. I told him he was holding the phone upside down. He said, in English so precise it was clearly a translation from Korean happening in real time, "I am aware. I find it helps." I married him 14 months later. Now, I need you to understand something about me before we go further. I am not a woman who worries. My mother raised me in a household where you either solve the problem or you make peace with it. There is no third option. I have lived in 3 countries, navigated every kind of difficult human situation, and I am generally not someone who gets rattled. Nothing prepared me for Kim Sunja. Jay told me about his mother in stages, the way you brief someone before entering specific territory. She was traditional. She was proud. She had built her entire life around her family, and her family around her kitchen. The kitchen was where she expressed everything she could not say directly: love, grief, approval, the long, complicated emotion of watching her son build a life far from her. Every feeling she had ever experienced had a corresponding dish. She had been cooking in that kitchen alone for 31 years. She will like you, Jay told me, 2 days before we flew to Busan to introduce me as his wife. He said it with the conviction of a man who is lying to himself because the alternative is too large to look at directly. I squeezed his hand. I did not say what I was thinking. What I was thinking was, she is going to hate me. The house was beautiful. A narrow 3-story in a part of Busan close to the water, old trees pressing against the windows, the smell of sesame oil drifting under the front door before we had even knocked. Omoni opened it. She was smaller than I expected. Jay is 6 feet, and I had built a mental image to match. But Kim Sunja was compact and precise, with the posture of a woman who has decided that gravity is a suggestion. She looked at Jay first, relief, joy, 2 years of missed dinners moving across her face in quick succession, and then she looked at me. She smiled. And I knew, immediately, that the smile was the most polite and most complete door I had ever seen shut. She took Jay's bag. She said something in Korean I did not understand. She led us inside, brought tea, sat with us, and asked Jay questions. She did not look at me again for 40 minutes. Not hostility. Something more precise than that. The careful non-seeing of a woman who has decided, quietly and entirely, that I am not yet a person she knows how to place. I drank my tea. I watched the room. I noted the photographs on the shelf. The ceramic bowl near the window looked old enough to be an heirloom. The cast iron pot on the stove with its lid placed just slightly off-center, venting the steam from whatever was inside. I noted that Jay was watching me watching his mother and trying not to show that he was doing it. We were all already being very careful with each other. The second day, Jay went out with his brother and I was alone in the house with Omoni for the first time. I had decided, because I am my mother's daughter and we do not hide in rooms when there is a problem that needs addressing, that I would offer to help with lunch. I walked into the kitchen. It was the most organized room I had ever been in. Not a showroom. The organization of a place that has been loved by someone for decades, every pot with its home, every jar labeled, the cutting board worn to a curve in the center from 10,000 meals. Photographs on the shelf above the window. Jay as a child. A man I recognized as his father from the wedding photographs, laughing at something outside the frame. Omoni was at the stove. Her back to me. I said, in the 12 words of Korean I had been studying for 3 months, "Can I help?" She turned. She looked at me. Then she looked at my hands, the way a craftsman assesses another person's tools before deciding whether to trust them. Her hand gestured, briefly, toward the vegetables on the counter. I picked up the knife. For about 40 seconds, she watched. I cut the way my mother taught me, fast and clean, the onion quartered and separated, the green onions on the diagonal. I felt her attention adjust. I thought, this is it. This is the moment she sees me. Then she took the knife from me. Gently. Without a word. Moved me a half step sideways. And finished cutting in a way that was, objectively, I am being precise here, identical to how I had been cutting. I stood there. In her kitchen. Displaced by silence. I went back to the living room and sat with Jay's childhood photographs and understood, properly and for the first time, the scale of what I was dealing with. Backhand index pointing down. Has anyone ever made you feel like a guest in a place you were supposed to belong? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this is already close to home, you know what to do with that subscribe button. A pattern developed over the next 18 months. Every visit, and we visited often, because Jay is close with his mother in the way good sons are, without performing it, I would try. I would offer. I would watch and learn and attempt. And every time, at some point, Omoni would take back the spoon. Not always dramatically. Sometimes it was a subtle repositioning of something I had started. Sometimes a quiet redo of something I had done correctly. Once she waited until I left the kitchen for 2 minutes, and when I came back, the entire pot had been emptied, rinsed, and started again from scratch. Jay noticed. He would come to me afterwards with the expression of a man navigating between 2 people he loves who are transmitting on completely different frequencies. She means well, he would say. I know, I would say. That was the truest conversation we ever had about it. Also, the least useful. Here's what I never said aloud, and what I need to say now so you understand what comes later. I was not angry at Omoni. I know that surprises people. My friends in Lagos thought I should be furious. My mother, when I told her, carefully, leaving out the worst of it, went quiet in the particular way she goes quiet when she is selecting her words against their violence. But anger was not what I felt. What I felt was grief. I had come to love Jay's family. I had come to love that house, that street, the sound of the sea from the upstairs window on still mornings. I wanted to belong to the world he had come from. And I was being told, not in words but in every quiet, consistent act, that I did not. That is not a reason for anger. That is a reason for grief. And grief, unlike anger, does not give you anything clear to push against. 18 months in, something happened that changed the shape of everything. Jay's brother got married. The wedding was in Seoul. We were there for a week, staying in the family home, the kitchen operating at a volume it had never reached in my presence, aunties arriving with dishes, neighbors dropping off ingredients, the full architecture of Korean family hospitality moving at speed. For 4 days, I was useful. Not in the kitchen, still Omoni's territory, defended with the same precision as always. But I organized. I translated when the English-speaking guests arrived. I managed the younger children. I noticed when the older aunt's seat was in a draft and moved her, quietly, without making a moment of it. On the 5th day, Omoni's oldest friend pulled me aside. Her name was Jung-suk. She had known this family for 40 years. She spoke careful English and she looked at me the way people look at you when they have decided to give you something they are not sure you are ready for. "You are a good woman," she said. I thanked her. She shook her head. "You do not understand what I am saying. I am saying, Sunja sees it. She sees everything. She always has. That is why the kitchen is hard." "I don't understand," I said. "Her husband cooked," Jungsuk said. "He was the one who taught her half of what she knows. When he died, she took back the kitchen. Not because she was sad. Because it was the last place she could still talk to him." She paused. "She is not keeping you out. She is keeping herself in." I stood very still. The wedding noise went on around me. Oh. Belle, if that just reframed something for you, subscribe. Because that shift right there is the turn this whole story is built on. And we are not yet at the hardest part. I want to be honest about what happened next. Nothing. Not immediately. This is not one of those stories where the protagonist has a revelation and then fixes everything in the following scene. Real life does not cut that cleanly. What I did was think. 4 weeks. I turned Jungsuk's words over the way you turn over a stone when you are not sure you want to look at what is underneath. Because what her words had done was make Omoni human to me in a way she had not quite been before. Not a force or an obstacle. A woman who had loved someone completely and lost him, and had gathered what remained of that love into the one place in her house that still held his shape. And I had been walking into that place with my confidence and my good knife skills and my desperate need to belong, and every single time, I was, without knowing it, asking her to share the most sacred room she had. I thought about my own mother. Her kitchen in Lagos. What would it mean to me if I lost her? Whether I could open that kitchen door to a stranger. Even a stranger I was beginning to love. I think the answer, for a long time, would have been no. 3 months after the wedding, we visited Busan again. I had a plan. Not a dramatic one. Not a confrontation or a speech. I was raised by a woman who taught me that the most powerful move you can make is to create a door, and then wait. What I brought was suya spice. A jar of it, ground by my mother's hands, packed in a small glass container I had carried in my hand luggage because it felt too important to trust to a suitcase. Suya spice is not a simple thing. Different families make it differently. The way kimchi is not the same in any 2 households. The way every grandmother's jollof is a slightly different argument. My mother's version carries the heat in the middle of the flavor, not at the front. You taste it late. It arrives like something you were not expecting, and then it does not leave. On the second evening, I asked Omoni, not if I could help, because that had never worked. I asked if I could show her something. Jay translated. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. I set the jar on the counter. I did not open it immediately. I explained, with Jay translating, that my mother had made this. It had traveled from Lagos. That was the smell of every Sunday morning I had known growing up. Omoni looked at the jar. Something shifted in her face that I could not quite read. I opened it. She leaned in, involuntarily, I think, the way you lean toward warmth without deciding to, and smelled it. A long pause. Then she said something to Jay. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face. Something between wonder and relief, in proportions I could not measure. She says it reminds her of the market near her grandmother's house. There was a spice stall. She says the smell is not the same. But the feeling of the smell is the same. I had to look at the counter for a moment. When I looked up, Omoni was already reaching for the jar. What happened next was not a dramatic handover. It was not a tearful reconciliation over a steaming pot. It was smaller than that, and I think more real because of it. Omoni held the jar and asked questions. She wanted to know how the spice worked with meat. Did the protein need to rest, or was it better to cook immediately? I told her my mother always rested it. Minimum 1 hour. Better overnight. She nodded. The slow nod of one expert registering that another expert has made a point worth considering. Then she went to the refrigerator and brought out the pork belly she had been marinating for the following evening. She pushed it toward me. Not handing it, she did not quite do that. But placing it within reach. Within reach. And she pointed at the jar. I unscrewed the lid. I took the brush she handed me without a word. And for the first time in 2 years, I put my hands on something in Kim Sinja's kitchen and she did not take it back. Yellow heart, that moment right there is why I will never stop telling these stories. If something just moved in your chest, that is the comment section calling you. Tell me what you are feeling. Seriously. This community holds things. Here's what 2 years had taught me that I had not understood at the beginning. The kitchen was never about the cooking. I know that sounds obvious now. But when you are the one standing outside it, being handed back the spoon again and again, it does not feel obvious. It feels like a verdict on your worth. It feels like a judgment that has been delivered and will not be appealed. What it actually was, what I understand it to be now, was a test I had not been given the correct instructions for. Kim Sinja was not asking, "Can you cook?" She was asking, "Do you understand that this is sacred?" She was asking, "Do you know that when you walk in here, you are walking into 31 years of a family I built?" She was asking, "Are you the kind of woman who sees what is truly in front of her, or only what she wants?" I had been answering the wrong question for 2 full years. I was trying to demonstrate competence when what she needed to see was reverence. The jar of suya spice from my mother's hands, it was not a culinary offering. It was a translation. It was me saying, in the language she actually spoke, I also have something sacred. I am not trying to replace yours. I am bringing mine to meet it. And she heard it. Because she has always spoken that language. She was fluent in it long before I arrived. I was the one who had needed to learn it. I have thought a lot, since then, about what belonging actually requires of us. Versus what we tell ourselves it requires. I grew up believing that belonging was given. That you arrived somewhere, you were welcomed, or you were not, and the outcome was largely outside your control. The best you could do was be good enough to deserve the welcome. That is not what belonging is. Belonging is something you build. Slowly. In the specific language of the person you are trying to reach. Not in your own language, delivered loudly enough that they must respond. Not through the volume of your effort or the quantity of your attempts. In their language. Patient. Specific. True. Omoni's language was, what is the story behind what you are carrying? Show me the sacred thing you brought from where you came from. Not to replace mine. To stand beside it. Once I understood that, everything changed. Not all at once. Not in a single scene. But in the way things change when the right understanding finally arrives, steadily, and without reversal. The pork belly was extraordinary. We cooked it together that next evening. Omoni was doing what she had always done. Me doing what I had finally been allowed to do. The suya spice was working through the Korean marinade base in a way neither of us had planned, but both of us recognized immediately as right. Jay came into the kitchen and stopped. He said nothing for a moment. Just stood in the doorway breathing it in. Then, is that what I think it is? His mother said something. He laughed, the full-body laugh I had been married to for 2 years and loved completely. She says, it is the smell of a woman who knows what she is doing, finally using it. I looked at Omoni. She was already turned back to the stove. But her shoulders were different. I had been watching those shoulders for 2 years. They were lighter. That visit ended differently from all the others. On the last morning, I came downstairs early. I am always early, always have been, and Omoni was already in the kitchen. She heard me on the stairs. And instead of the usual absorbed silence, she turned. She held up a second cup. Just that. A second cup, lifted slightly. An eyebrow raised. A question. I said yes. In Korean. We sat at the kitchen table, the two of us, in the early morning before anyone else was awake. We did not have enough shared language for a conversation. But we had enough to sit. Enough to point at the persimmon tree outside the window and agree, without words, that it was beautiful. Enough to be two women in a kitchen at the beginning of a morning. That was everything. Bell subscribe, because this is not the last difficult, beautiful, honest story we are going to tell on this channel. There is so much more of this family to show you. And we are just getting started. I have to tell you one more thing. A few months after the pork belly evening, Jay and I were on the balcony of our Seoul apartment, late at night, with tea. I told him what Jung-suk had said at the wedding. About his father. About the kitchen. He was quiet for a long time. Then, I knew. I did not know that you would need to know it too. I thought if I just kept believing it would work out, it would. I thought about how to answer that. It did work out, I said. But not because of me, he said. Because of both of us, I told him. And because of her. And because of my mother, who ground that spice. He nodded. He leaned back and looked at the Seoul sky for a while. Then he said, she asked me. Last week on the phone. She asked if you had a recipe. For the suya chicken she saw on your mother's Instagram. I turned to look at him. She is learning to navigate your mother's Instagram, he said, in the tone of a man who finds this both deeply funny and deeply moving. She has her reading glasses on every time I call. I did not know what to do with that feeling. So I did what women in my family have always done when something is too large to carry in words. I went inside. I called my mother. I asked her to write down the recipe. For Omoni. N. If you are in this right now, if you are the one who keeps being handed back the spoon, I want to say something to you that I needed someone to say to me 2 years ago. Stop performing your worthiness. I say that with love, because I know exactly what it costs and I know exactly why you are doing it. You are trying to speak loudly enough to be heard. You are trying to prove, through action, that you deserve your place in this story. Belonging does not reward performance. It rewards presence. The moment I stopped arriving at that kitchen with something to prove, and started arriving with something to share, the whole dynamic changed. Not because I changed her. Because I changed the conversation. I stopped asking, do you accept me? And I started saying, here is something of mine. Here is where I come from. Here is what my mother's hands make. I made myself visible. Not impressive. Seeable. Those are different things and the difference matters enormously. An impressive person walks into the room and you see their performance. A seeable person walks into the room and you see them. Their actual history. Their specific love. The real thing they are carrying. Omoni had no reason to accept an impressive daughter-in-law. She had every reason to want to know a real one. I was so busy trying to be the former that I nearly missed the chance to be the latter. One last thing. 6 months ago, Omoni came to stay with us in Seoul. First time she had stayed in our home rather than us in hers. On the first morning, she stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the layout. Then she looked at me. I stepped to one side. Gestured at the stove. She stepped in. And then, and this is the part one will carry for the rest of my life, she beckoned me in after her. Kaya, she said. My name, in her mouth, for the first time without the careful neutrality she had always used. With warmth in it. With pull. The way you say a name when it belongs to someone who now belongs to you. Kaya. Come. I went in. And we cooked together. In my kitchen, this time. And she let me lead. Yellow heart, if this story moved you, if you saw yourself, or your own mother-in-law, or your own kitchen in any of this, please like this video. Not for the algorithm. For the women in the comments who are going to find this at 2 a.m. feeling exactly what you felt. They need to know they are not alone. Your like is how they find it. Subscribe. Because this family has more stories to tell. And the next one is even harder, and even more beautiful. We will see you there.